particular planning instrument that this region has implemented, first as a reaction to crisis, but then evolved into an opportunity for them to do a much better regional planning, which eventually allowed Chengdu to go on into this integrated urban-rural co-development path. Okay, let's see, trying to move to the next. I want to begin with a discussion on how to conceptualize the relationship between rural and urban areas. For many of you, rural and urban is this very discrete, two different things in terms of their physical shape, in terms of their environment, in terms of the services they offer, in terms of the type of people that you may encounter. But I'd like to propose this sustainable cities and landscape model. This is developed by our hub, the Sustainable Cities and Landscape Hub. We use this as a model to help us analyze and understand urbanization, and particularly from regional perspective. So thinking about city not as an isolated entity, but is entity embedded in a larger landscape, a larger context. That approach to look at urban-rural relationship naturally brings us to look for the flows, the linkages, the connections, interdependence. So if you look at the travel of people, the flow of the movement of wildlife, the flow of goods and material services, eventually then the rural urban area becomes a region that consists of systems, networks. There are boundaries that delineate towns and cities and villages at the different spatial scales, but those boundaries are permeable. They do not prevent the flow of all the things we look at. So this approach to look at city emphasize how the city itself, its own survivability, its own prosperity depends on the entire region. I'd like to use Sir Patrick Geddes. This is a geographer, engineer, or biologist who more than 100 years ago, when studying cities in evolution, had this quote: "It takes a whole region to make a city." This is a great characterization of how the relationship between city, or maybe cities in the region, and then the rural areas. Being able to finding or understand the flows and linkages eventually calls for urban-rural partnership, calls for intergovernment collaboration. When we looking at plans, looking at the projects, looking at the investments, because this approach brings a variety of benefits in terms ranging from capacity improvement across intergovernment collaboration, promotion of public service accessibility, reduction of mutual unnecessary competition, and efficiency and effectiveness of governance. In fact, this approach of looking at urban-rural relationship calls for a holistic and regional approach to integrated urban-rural co-development. And we have international agencies such as UN Habitat trying to mainstream this approach to help support very rapid urbanization globally. And you look at this circle of palette with different colors that represent 10 different principles, which the international agencies trying to promote to guide local implementation and regional planning. And this basically, if we translate into local actions, you can look into governance, planning, investment, and it all comes down to three things, in my opinion. One is the number one thing, is locally grounded intervention. Everything you do, even from a regional perspective, you need to look local. But the local could be across scales. Region is your local, a site is a local, a community is a local. So locally grounded interventions calls for capacity looking at the regional ecological system services, but also look at site conditions. The next thing is partnership. this approach calls for intergovernment coordination, calls for partnership of private sectors, public sectors, civil societies, and a grassroots organization. And the next thing is integration. This integration is cross-scale, spatially, cross-economic sectors, and across different subject areas that in the planning we tend to focus separately between land use, transportation, housing, but this linkage-based approach to integrated development requires us to put them all together in a holistic framework. So having principles, a lot of things easier said than done. I'd like to use Chengdu as a case to understand how these linkages, they are universally applicable, but when you put them into implication, different regions, different localities have their unique context. So you will need to find pragmatic solutions or pragmatic actions. Chengdu's case began without any of this formal documentation about principles. They were more or less the trial and error approach, but they're willing to try, and then they're willing to build on their ingenuity to think about planning. And also they did a lot of things based on a genuine love of their region. So this kind of a general attitude toward harmonious co-development, coexistence of human nature has a very, very long history rooted in this region's development. So like I said, I will talk about region. Like I say, it's a very short, quick discussion. Hopefully we can use this as a case to understand the principles and maybe bring some takeaways to Hong Kong's upcoming very large-scale regional planning and development. A quick discussion for people, most of people here already know where Chengdu is, a capital city of Sichuan province. Right? Here, I want to make a distinction when I talk about Chengdu is Chengdu municipality. Is this giant gray area. And a lot of people who you want to visit Chengdu, you probably only visit what we call the central city, which has the same name, and which is the mostly urbanized area. But Chengdu municipality as a region has 21 million population, but the urban population is close to 50 or 60%. So it's very important to know that when we look at Chengdu's case, we're looking at entire region, and we know that there's a regional government system set up that allow that kind of a integrated planning to take place. So this institutional context is critical to what we see, what happened in Chengdu, what they can achieve. Very quickly, Chengdu is considered in the land of abundance, a lot of cultural, natural qualities and characteristics are known to people in China. It's considered one of the most livable cities in China. And it's has a kind of historically very, very long tradition of integrating human needs and nature needs together when we think about human settlement. I want to highlight on three things. So Chengdu as a city is the oldest city in China, has sits on the same site for more than 2,500 years. And then the city, when the settlement started, the city organically adapted to its like biological geographic conditions. So one point, Chengdu's main city axis follows its prime wind direction in that region is northeast 38 degrees. And then Chengdu's rural area is known for have this beautiful natural organic settlement where you have cluster of a dozen of rural households clustered together close to a creek or river, and then they have more efficient use of their own resources, easy access to natural resources, and also their farm is kind of a with close proximity. So this is called Lingpan. The other important ancient engineering wonder is called Dujiangyan, which is a site I think it's about 100 kilometers from Chengdu. This is the site was developed more than 2,000 years ago when the government at the time were successfully control the volume speed of the Min River, which is a project without dams that could control the river's flow and speed and successfully control flooding and allow the lower stream basin to be able to receive adequate irrigation, but without suffering the uncontrollable flooding. And because of that, that's when Chengdu become this land of abundance and then very fertile agricultural land, and then enjoy its prosperity in the last few thousand years. But Chengdu is rapid growth, urbanization in this region, just like other parts of China, didn't come without cost. So you can see how rapid the region has experienced population growth. Within 2 decades, the population almost doubled within the region. And then in tandem with that is very rapid urban physical expansion. And if you just compare this green area, that's the developed land in 2000. And if you look at 2015 with all the red, so the Chengdu within a decade, 2 decades, the urban expansion is in exponential numbers, 2 times, 4 times, and 8 times of expanding. So that kind of a speed of expansion has manifested in a lot of negative consequences. I mean, we know the environment degradation, the ecological service decline, but in general, just the quality of life people in that region has suffered because of that uncontrollable development. So this is a picture of what it used to look like in the ecological zone, which we'll be talking about, is the main planning instrument. So this area is kind of close to, this is Chengdu's 4th ring road. It's a complete circle around the city. And by the time in early 2000s, areas, this is in the more of a peri-urban region, unplanned, poorly planned urban expansion is taking this form of shanty towns, low quality agriculture, industries, and then poor housing estates all scattered in that region. So the city also recognized if the city continues expansion in this way, eventually the city of Chengdu will not be able to maintain their quality in terms of environment, in terms of their livability in this region. So the government started thinking about both strategies. Chengdu, it was the first one thinking about we need to use urban containment instrument to control urban expansion so that we can protect the rural area. So there's this what we call the inside and outside game. If you want to protect urban area, you have to contain everything inside the city. So this is what they did. And this is after 2 decades, they are able to achieve some of the original goals. So keep the city far from the encroaching the urban area, the rural area. But the rural area was simultaneously restored to natural condition or to better living condition for the rural villagers, or integrate public space into the rural area so that you can bring the urban residents into their open space, into their peri-urban region. So the peri-urban area no longer look like they were 2 decades ago, were unplanned, scattered, messy condition. Now they are now clear, well-planned, well-designed. In fact, they have turned peri-urban planning as a thing. So even in the US or in China, almost everybody when you talk about planning, it's urban planning. So everything inside urban is planned, and everything outside urban is either just left over or not planned. So Chengdu actually created the additional kind of territory, they now apply comprehensive planning approach to this particular territory. That's their peri-urban zone, which happened to be what they call the Chengdu ecological zone. So I want to do some assessment of their approach. So bring back the earlier conversation about the principles, right? And then what Chengdu did is basically translates to three things: establish connection, linkages, and then protect outside the urban area, and then let urban and rural share the benefits of urban development, share the benefits of peri-urban planning. So we'll look at some of the specifics. So this term called Chengdu model is coined by a professor at Renmin University, Professor Ye Yuming. She actually wrote a book about talk about Chengdu model, and then she published in American planning journals introducing this Chengdu model. I'm not, what I'm summarizing here does not do justice to her work. So I basically just pull out things that is relevant to what I'm going to talk about here, and also bring in some of my understanding and then analysis here. So I want to say Chengdu, three things make what we see this outcome to be realized, become reality. One is regional governance. Chengdu is one of the first regions given the authority, when I talk about Chengdu, the municipality, to have an integrated, centrally controlled planning authority. So in the past, still actually happening in many Chinese cities, the planning authority is split between cities and urban areas and then rural villages. So there's a lot of fragmentation. Chengdu was given the authority, so they utilize that to great effectiveness. Second part is there's a pretty significant institutional reform to allow grassroots government to take place. It's to limited degree, but good enough to allow them to be able to reach consensus when they think about changing land use, because redevelop or turning the poorly developed sites back into better land uses or designated land uses. The other thing is the urban-rural unified development markets that Chengdu basically get rid of the household registration system, that dual system where you have rural registration versus urban. So they open its system up so rural migrants can come freely into the urban area, but they get to keep their urban farm and then their rights to farm. And then they even set up a market to allow them transfer their rights to farming to other people. So that's the governance part, set up this good institutional background to allow planning, to allow good planning to take place, to allow good implementation to be carried out. And then in the planning part, their approach is contain and protect and restore. So for urban and for rural area, they have different strategies, but the goal is to reach or reduce urban-rural disparities. Chengdu has been very successful in terms of equalization of urban-rural living conditions. So rural villages, when they are rebuilt, they are giving the urban standard in terms of facilities, infrastructure, and services. So they use that as a way to help improve rural conditions, because the goal is to retain population in rural area. Because when you build rural place, you beautify them, what they call the 美丽乡村建设, is for rural residents to feel like they want to stay in their villages so that they don't have to go to the urban area to look for opportunities to improve their living conditions. So I'm going to move faster now, looking at where the ecological zone is. So this, where can you see, if you can see my mouse cursor, you can see that this is the fourth ring of the city's what they call freeway surrounding the city. So the city could not find a policy line or delineate a policy line to establish this, basically a development limiting boundary. So they just say, well, let's just use a very dominant physical feature to do this for this purpose. And in early 2000, this was the last ring road that was just built. And you can know now Chengdu has 6 ring roads already. And when they develop, so this ring road become their ecological zone. So the basic idea is to set 500 meters on each side. So in total is a belt of 1,000 meters surrounding this ring road. But they allowed several wedges to permeate it back into the urban area. So this wedge area become dynamic, adjustable areas where they allow rural activity to take place, to allow agricultural tourism to take place, to allow urban residents to interact with rural activities. So this become they call the belt and wedge form. And then this is a kind of a diagram illustrated that 500 meters on each side protection zone. And then the plan, there's a master plan and implemented, applied to this ecological zone, basically specify desired land uses, amount of development that's allowed, a standard of development. And the goal of this development, essentially, when it began, it was used to contain urban growth. But once they started this process, they recognized this crisis-driven solution now offer them great opportunity to think about how they can use this area to improve the whole region's ecosystem condition and qualities. So, so what they did was using this area as a territory, because encircling entire within the region, to establish that strong rural linkages. As I mentioned earlier, appropriate land uses were allowed in this region. Most of the land uses is related to provide services, amenities to rural residents, and to provide open space in the form of parks, recreational facilities to allow urban residents to go in there, and to support ecotourism, urban agriculture, and so that you have economic flows in and out. And the city then implemented their transportation planning, infrastructure planning, and the investment comprehensive planning, all based on this kind of a spatial framework. So with this circle or the belt and wedges, and they integrated in public transportation hubs into different wedge sites, and then connected with local economic opportunities. So this is some of the pictures showing what's happening within that belt. So some of this, they turn into, this is basically economic agriculture, flower nursery sites, tree nursery sites, and then some of this turn into park to allow easy access. Some of this also integrated in large-scale poverty evacuation sites. So when they have this spatial framework set up, now they bring in a lot of subjects into this planning process. Okay? So this is, they integrated their evacuation planning into the ecological zone as well. Now stepping out, I have to express my appreciation. I got all the pictures from the local planning institutions, planners. So this is more recent photos giving us bird's eye view to see 2 decades now in this region in the making, how effective this planning and implementation is. So this is the 4th ring road, and then on both sides you will see their implemented all this kind of a agricultural land, open space mixed together. So it's, in a sense, it's still peri-urban, but it's a lot more well designed, and then by planning, by a systematic approach, and then also based on local conditions as well. This system integrated into with other functions, so become multifunctional region and territory. So this shows, look at this. This is a footbridge and then bikeways. Chengdu now has the world's longest bikeway system integrated into this belt, this wedge and belt ecological zone. And then they built all kinds of transportation infrastructure connecting different transportation means. So those footbridges and bikeway bridges connecting with some of the motorway travel infrastructure. So the city wanted to make this region not just for nature, but also for residents as well. This region also takes on a significant role to restore ecological environment, particularly for water. The approach they have been able to successfully implement is to create artificial wetlands, create lakes, rivers, to establish a blue infrastructure system on the site, and also selectively planting vegetation and a landscape the site so that it serves as a way to purifying waters. And their artificially constructed wetland actually now serves to treat storm waters from the city. And using this opportunity to redevelop some of the sites, they also bring in ecological restoration and then restore habitat for wildlife, and also bring in human activity into this area, but controlled, allow human to have access, limited access, but also certainly provide educational opportunity for the residents to understand how important the rural, the open space, the role they play for their city's health, public health, and then kind of well-being. I mentioned earlier, when they started to redevelop or replan this area, a lot of sites are already being developed, poorly constructed, low construction quality. So this process of making this peri-urban planning and development is also taking advantage of existing buildings, redevelop them, to turn them into something more of a community asset. This one was an old dilapidated primary school building turned into an agricultural science space. So that's another thing they did there. Open space is very turning in the park form. It's widely spread out in this peri-urban zone, the ecological zone, for people to enjoy the nature, to have programmed activities, to have sports, recreation opportunities. So it's become very, very accessible. I have anecdotal stories, people who would rather ditch their cars and then walk in that ecological zone to go to their workspace, even though it takes longer, but they enjoy the environment so much. Okay, so quickly, I hope my time is okay. Just to talk about why Chengdu is being successful. In the three areas we talk about: governance, investment, and planning. I feel I kind of identify several of the things they did very successfully. Everything they began is because of the local conditions, local concerns, local approach, local solutions. And as of now, the entire region, the municipal government has set up their new development goals, projected population growth. And at least in the plan, what they are talking about is based on the water capacity in the region, based on the other ecosystem service capacity in the region. They use that as a way to determine their population growth and to determine their economic projected goals. Partnership coordination is critical in this process. Without collaboration among different government, the planning and implementation will not be successful. So if you recall earlier, this ring road, in fact, although it's within the city boundary, actually originally when it began, it crossed at least 11 different jurisdictions. Each jurisdiction is scattered in terms of authority to do things, in terms of authority to do planning and implementation. So that regional planning authority really helps overcome those barriers. And last thing I want to emphasize is this whole process is also driven by a genuine concern about the urban-rural inequality or disparity. So when the investment go into the place, a lot of work the government did was trying to improve the rural communities' living conditions. So not only they improve the rural building standards, community service and facilities infrastructure standards, they also provide job and service programs to support rural migrants if they wish to go to cities to find a job, and then allow them to maintain their farming rights. So that is very, very important. I know the city invests very, very heavily into those kind of public infrastructure, public condition improvement in rural area. In fact, I think the number was in 2010, almost entire cities' public budget went into improve rural area conditions. So planning is another important aspect. Actually, I guess, as I mentioned, this planning instrument was utilized very, very successfully in terms of creating, adopting a system approach to generate synergies to help maximize this ecological zones impact and then output. With the kind of a larger scale systematic approach, and they also pay attention to placemaking, and by looking into culture and community involvement to create that sense of place. I've interviewed several planners. They spend a lot of work kind of consider how this open space belt could affect people's view of urban cityscape, and how that will affect rural participants or rural residents' perception of the other parts of their community. And they also bring in urban planners into the rural community to allow the community to benefit from their expertise. So those planners would work with community members very closely to help them think about redesign, redevelop their new villages, new settlement, and even take into consideration their desire to be neighbor with other people they know, and then apply the idea to the design accordingly. Obviously, environmentally conscious approach is very, very strong in this whole process. And then you can see the restoration and also the very much water sensitive approach to think about their green, blue, and gray infrastructure integration. Okay, so I want to kind of talk about some of the takeaways from Chengdu's experience to what I think Hong Kong could be benefit from their lessons and then their experience. So I feel the first thing that for any regional planning to be successful is to have very, very good understanding of your place. That locally grounded approach has to be relying on your very good understanding. That means this data, information, and knowledge come from multiple disciplinary approach to look at the region, understand the different aspects of the region, and across different scales. And then it's on the ground empirical observation. It requires very much investment in this process. And also the goal is trying to understand what the people want, what the local community wants, what are their potential challenges and then issues, and what's their ideas and ideals. And then only when you have equipped with that knowledge, you can start identify challenges. And from the challenges comes with opportunities. What Chengdu is successful is they were first faced with the challenge and the crisis in the first, but then they turned that around into this great opportunity and great tool. In this whole process, balance the need of satisfying the needs of human nature. Chengdu, thanks to their long history of kind of having this ingenious ideas and solution to approach human needs and nature needs. So there's a long tradition there they can tap into. But the government itself has a very clear idea about what they wanted, what balance they want to achieve. So when this instrument was created, connected with their other economic development plans, that instrument is not developed for economic growth per se. It was very clear the instrument was created for equity reason. They wanted to use that as a way to reduce rural-urban disparities. In this process, and they were able to spend time to establish the alignment across regional ambition, community goals, and local situations. And because of that alignment, they were able to achieve. I'm not saying they did everything 100% perfectly. There are a lot of issues, and then there are controversies in the process as well. But at least I think that this method, this approach is it's more or less acceptable, and then it's actually adaptable to other places as well. So at the end, still that principles are there. The linkages are there, would require us to look for them, to understand them, and then eventually, hopefully Hong Kong could have very pragmatic strategies to apply those principles to develop their new metropolis where benefits is shared and the responsibility is shouldered across all stakeholders. Thank you.